Shawn McBreairty is the director of special projects at Maine First Project, a nonprofit organization offering grassroots activist and advocacy training in multiple areas. For over 2 years, Shawn has been exposing critical race theory and hypersexualization of minors or grooming in the classrooms, as well as many dangers within the programs, teachings, and curriculum of Maine and the nation's government-run K through 12 schools. Make sure you check out Shawn's podcast, Main Source of Truth. That can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, all the usual ones. And you can follow him on social media. All the links are in the description below. Shawn, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the channel.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity. I've been checking out some of your Twitter information, and one of the things I wrote down as a note is that daily scoreboard tweet that you recently put up. I thought was just genius. I could be using that for teachers, trans cult members, school board members, or local media, and maybe I'll do the same thing. So great introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Awesome. Well, I do think I actually have a book called Actively Unwoke where I put my 11 rules for fighting back against the woke left. And I think that shaming them and mocking them relentlessly is absolutely a tactic we should be engaged in. Not all the time. We have to be serious too, but I think a little shame never hurt anyone, if I'm honest about it.
Yeah, I mean, Saul Alinsky and the Rules for Radicals, I think number 5 might have been, one of those pieces where you ridicule and you expose, and that's what they're doing every single day. Again, I can't say that I've done it perfectly. I don't think any of us have. We sin every single day, and we try to make up for that the best we can. However, and I know I've watched some of your videos, there's not enough people out there right now in America who are either fully aware of what's going on with the school systems, the K through 12 government-run schools, or they're aware, so they're malfeasant, and they just don't want to make that life-altering decision for their child to have to now maybe be pulled out of that school for homeschooling or a Christian school or something else. And it's just a lot of people with head in the sand right now. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do here in Maine and across the country is expose as many of these situations as I can, in hopes that as we near the midterms on November 8th, especially here in Maine, where we're trying to elect a new governor. Currently, Janet Mills is the worst governor we've ever seen in the state of Maine. Her Maine Department of Education, the MEA Teachers Union, a lot of these trans cult activists, they're just tearing these souls out of these kids. And again, parents just don't seem to care for whatever reason.
I totally agree with you. And this is a constant struggle I have not to blackpill in this scenario because, like you, I feel like I've been screaming about this for a couple of years and I don't even have kids. And I'm like, why do I care more about what your kids are learning than you do? And it's really difficult. And it is, and maybe we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but, it is really difficult to look at this stuff every single day and to see very clearly what's going on in the schools and to hold up a megaphone and say, look at what they're doing, look at what they're teaching. And it just seems like not that many people care, but we have to keep out there and fighting the good fight because, without people making noise like you're trying to do and like Gabs is trying to do and like I'm trying to do, then really we really are lost. So how I kind of view it is, if I'm going to go down with a fight, I'm going to fight regardless. And hopefully people listen and they come along.
Yeah. And I think, what I've been experiencing here the last couple of years, so I've been doing this for, I guess, a little over 2 years. Gabrielle Clark and I have, she's been on the podcast, Main Source of Truth. And I really appreciate her advocacy and her activist work across the nation in, I think, Arizona and Texas. But what I'm finding is it's either a fight or flight or flee kind of scenario, or, when you say something like, hey, child pornography is in our local school library, and people kind of cock their head like a dog and look at you and kind of, they don't know how to take that in, right? They don't know how to process that information. And then you show them books, you show them pages, you show them the Dewey Decimal System and the library system. And books are only one small component of what's happening out there. It's really a multifaceted, very well organized, heavily funded effort. And it's the same fight that Gabs is fighting now in Texas that I'm fighting here in Maine, because this whole thing has been organized by the left. And so you can kind of go black helicopter theory if you want, but I've experienced it, and I know you've experienced it, and other folks have as well. And the real issue is, like I said, is some parents, I don't know if they really want to know what's happening, because I'm 51 years old. When I went to school in the 70s and 80s, you could respect firefighters and police officers and teachers That's not the case anymore. And teachers, unfortunately, they have been indoctrinated themselves. Many of the young teachers coming out of college, they've just invested into this whole woke nonsense, and it's this victim mentality that they're pushing. And so, anyway, yeah, we're trying to expose as much as we can, and we've done a pretty good job getting global attention on several of those stories.
And I'm really grateful you're doing this, and I think you're absolutely right. It's hard to explain, especially to I graduated from high school in 1999, so I'm a little bit younger than you, but not like significantly younger than you.
Yep, yep.
And I don't remember like going to school in the 90s. This stuff wasn't as prevalent, or at least not as pronounced. Now, I do think it was starting to make its way into the school when I left, but I think, what I'm seeing when I'm doing these investigations of schools around the country is we're really looking at like the mid to late 2000s when it really started getting entrenched in the curriculum. So I feel like I just missed it by a couple of years, and it really is difficult to explain to people who went to school in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s. What is going on in public schools today bears no resemblance to what you experienced in public schools. I mean, I actually have somewhere in a pile on my desk somewhere, this textbook that used to be taught, I think, in middle school, teaching about how communism is bad and evil and wrong and antithetical to everything the United States stands for. That used to be taught in school. That's no longer taught in school. The opposite is being taught in school now. And it's really a matter of like waking people up and showing them it is a very different reality than what you remember. But how did you get involved in this? How did you, like, everyone always has an interesting story about how they got sucked into this world. What happened?
Yeah, so I always voted. I was never a political person. I enjoyed the outdoors. I was the president of my snowmobile club. I was on the Land and Conservations Commission. I hunt and fish, and like to just get outdoors. And so I always voted. I always knew what the issues were at the time of the elections, but I didn't think that anybody, could change their local, even, local scenario, much less a national effort. And on June 2nd, 2020, my twins were juniors in a high school, MSCD 51, which is in Cumberland, Maine, just outside of Portland. It is recognized generally as the best school in Maine. Okay. It's far from that. But we received on June 2nd of 2020 a letter that actually said white supremacy in it 4 times. And if I can find it here. Well, I don't know if I still have it. Yeah, okay, so I still have it here. Let me take just a minute to read what this letter said. Now, this is on the back of, or the heels of, George Floyd's death, as literally Minneapolis is burning to the ground because of BLM and Antifa, okay? So we had an equity committee that I wasn't aware of, paid for by taxpayers, and they had met for about a year, and they were just waiting for that match to be lit. And George Floyd, unfortunately, was that match. But it says here, "Dear MSCD 51 community, as a majority white school district," so I'll just stop right there. Maine is 94% white. Okay. Now I'm an Irish American, 5th generation potato picker, whatever you want to talk about. But the fact that our state is white, it's a statement. It doesn't mean anything, right? We're not a bunch of white supremacists, but I'll get to that. "We stand in solidarity with Black movement leaders. We call for justice for George Floyd and other Black lives that have been taken by white supremacy in our nation. It's our duty to educate ourselves and dismantle the violent and oppressive structures which have kept us divided." And then she goes on through here. Let me skip through this a little bit. She talks about, "In a culture that continuously reinforces white supremacy," so that's now twice, "justice can only be achieved when we confront and repair the anti-Blackness woven through every aspect of our society, homes, schools, workplaces, etc. We cannot move forward until we reconcile the intentional barriers white people have built to harm Black people. Barriers," now again, this is actually a white person writing this letter, just to be fully transparent. "Barriers that prevent Black people from having access to rigorous education and safe and nurturing environments." There's nobody in Cumberland, North Yarmouth, Maine, who didn't have access to the best school in Maine, okay? So then they talk about, again, "We recognize that Black people experience violence every single day because of our white supremacist society." That's the 3rd time. "We are a committee of engaged parents, students, educators, and board members, all committed to working together and our future by educating our students that Black lives matter. Big B, big L, big M, the actual BLM company, Black Lives Matter. We continue to partner with Community Change Inc., which I'll mention. We are actively learning that the supposed truths we've been socialized to believe about Blackness are violent and untrue. We will work to assess our curriculum, educate our community, dismantle the anti-Blackness all of us have internalized by living in a society built on what?
Whiteness, white supremacy.
White supremacy, and provide tools to interrupt anti-Black racism. And then it says, we grieve for George Floyd, we grieve for Breonna Taylor, we grieve for Ahmaud Arbery, and we grieve for all Black lives taken by, I guess it is 5 times, white supremacy. So that letter, when I read that, I was sitting at the table. We were all working from home during COVID. I turned to my wife and I said, do you believe what we're reading here? Like, where did this email come from? This isn't the town I grew up in. I had lived there for 20 years. Okay. I thought it was the best little town in America, Cumberland, Maine. It was the most affluent, most educated, and safest community in Maine. It was in the annual report every year. And so I was lucky to live there, I thought, right? So I sent a very polite email back to the superintendent. His name's Jeff Porter. He's a lying narcissist, by the way, and I have no problem calling him that. I can back all of that up. He basically then came out a couple days later, and this was very polite. Like I said, like, hey, Jeff, you missed peaceful protest. You missed the First Amendment. You missed talking to your parents. You also missed that our police force is the best in the state. And again, that was put in the annual report, Town of Cumberland, every single year. He basically threw all those guys under the bus. So 2 days later, he came out with another statement, basically backing up his first statement. And the gist of it, really, Carlin, was you're not woke enough to understand what I'm trying to tell you.
Okay? Oh my God.
Now, he had gone through this. He had gone through this training from Community Change Inc., which is out of Boston. They still exist. And their executive director, a lady named Shay Stewart Belay, you can follow her at Black Girl in Maine on Twitter without the E at the end. So Maine being M-A-I-N. Instead of M-A-I-N-E, at Black Girl in Maine.
Having the E would be white supremacy.
What's that?
Having the E would be white supremacy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So she's basically we're paying her tax dollars. I think it was $12,500 to hold trainings with the superintendent, the administration, and all the teachers. So think about all the payroll. My estimate was we had spent probably $200,000 in payroll over the course of a year dealing with this nonsense. And this lady on Twitter, during the height of, all of the riots going on and the BLM activists and just, the whole Antifa nonsense and again, cities burning to the ground all around the country, inciting violence. She was totally fine with the violence against white folks. She had sexual dysfunction. She had sexual concerns. She just spewed all this stuff out on Twitter. So I brought these tweets to the superintendent, Jeff Porter, again, the lying narcissist, Jeff Porter. And I said, Jeff, here are a dozen or more of her most heinous tweets. There's hundreds of them that I could give him. I said, I'd like you to read these out loud, word for word, and don't skip a beat. And he wouldn't do it. And I said, well, you're proving my point. Secondarily, during this meeting with the town council chair, the superintendent, and the VP, or the director of HR with MSCD 51, the chair person of the town council brought to him their June newsletter, which said something to the effect of, in order for us to eliminate racism, we must eliminate capitalism and move to a socialist and anarchist form of government. So I'm not making this stuff up. This is word for word. I still have the pictures, right?
I know you're not, because and I'll just interrupt. So what I tell people all the time, because we were talking before we came on the air about how I watch these woke trainings every single week on my other channel, and in almost every single one of them, they talk about abolishing capitalism in every single one.
Yeah, except for these folks are actually they're grifters. They're basically grifting on mostly woke white women. No offense. But basically these soccer moms sitting around towns like Cumberland, Maine, thinking about, maybe some of their past indiscretions, whatever it is, their white guilt, their own internalized white guilt. And they're just eating this like sliced bread. It's no big deal to them. But back to the point, nobody has ever proven institutional racism. And again, I've been doing this for over 2 years. And every time I say, can you prove that there's institutional racism in Cumberland, Maine, in the United States, there's no examples of that, right? So we went back and forth, and we went into the situation, and I know you've got a training on FOIA requests. In Maine's Freedom of Access Act, in some states it's FOIA, but it's basically that freedom that you can gain any information you want from any government entity You just have to know how to ask for it. And so I think your training will be very important to folks. But I started doing that. I started forward requesting for records of this company, Community Change Inc., how much money we had spent, the payroll information. And as I dug more, Carlin, the worse it got. So I talk a lot about that. We're at that top 10% of the iceberg that you can see above the waterline. And we still haven't got to that 90% below the waterline that'll actually rip your hull from the ship. Okay. So long story short, I guess, and I'm trying to sort of surmise this first component, and then I'll take a breath. But this was an adversarial relationship. So they kicked me out of a school board meeting. I was ready to go to jail for my First Amendment rights. My wife was crying at the kitchen table one night at 6 o'clock before the meeting because she knew that I was ready to rock and I would go to protect my rights, the rights of my children, and the rights of my neighbors' children, if that's what had to become. And I called their bluff. They caved on everything. This back and forth kept going for about a year. And in November of 2020, across the street from my house was the school campus. And there was a black fence there. And they allowed a honk if you support the school board banner put on that fence. It was actually a spray painted bed sheet right across from my house where my twins, who were juniors, now seniors in high school, that we lived. And at all hours of the night, the leftists would go by at 2 or 3 in the morning, honking their horn. Now, little did they know that I had actually been spending a lot of my time here in Hamden, and I'll speak to that in a minute. And my wife, unfortunately, was being woken up at 2 or 3 in the morning. So about maybe 30 days before the March 15th election, sorry, it was about March 15th. This is about 30 days before the general election for school board here in Cumberland. I had taken a picture of a lady who chose not to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance on our school board. And I had put that out on social media. It's still out there today. You can still find it. And I had made a small political poster board of that picture, and I brought it to a school board meeting. And I walked down the aisle and I said, peaceful protest, as they kicked me out of this school board meeting. And I did that because the First Amendment, which I'm literally wearing on my sleeve today, protects your free speech and peaceful protest. And again, as long as you don't incite violence or use obscenities, you can almost say whatever you want about whomever you want, wherever you want, right? So this when they kicked me out of the school board, I had taken that sign, I put it on my lawn, which again was directly across the campus of the school, and I put a spotlight on it because I knew this lady, Ann Maximowicz, who I will call an American communist till I die, had to drive by my house to get to her house. So she drives by, she sees this sign lit up, okay, and she freaks out. The next day she comes and hands a note to my daughter, comes to my house, uninvited, hands a note to my daughter, one of my twins, and says, this isn't free speech, this is harassment. And I basically took it and I put it right in the trash, and I said, no, it's exactly free speech. I can do whatever I want on my own property, right? And this was all that sort of like, I think, and you mentioned tonight at 9:30, trying to have a lighter side of what's going on. This is pure evil we're dealing with. We're in this battle of good and evil and basically Marxism or not. If you're either a Marxist or you're an American, right? So she then came back, tried to talk to my wife and tried to talk my wife into taking the sign down. The next day, I served her with a prohibitive conduct warning, basically a no trespass, so she couldn't come back on my property a third time. And she went batshit crazy, if I can use that word. The next day, she tried to serve me with a harassment order, which was completely inconsequential. There was no judge that was going to allow that to happen. And when she did that, I took that small political sign, Carlin, and I said to a friend of mine, how big can you make this photo? And he said, I can make it a 4-foot by 8-foot billboard size sheet of plywood sized photo. And I said, well, how much is it? And he said $164. And I was like, oh man, I said, my wife is going to, and I told him the story and he said, I'll do it for $64. And I was like, sold. So I put this giant sign. Now I have decorated it with Trump flags and American flags and multiple spotlights. And for Christmas, I had, Christmas lights and stockings hung and all this other stuff to just draw attention to the fact that we have, socialist American communists on our school board. And for 3 or 4 months, I guess I had this on my lawn. I take it down for Halloween and some things here and there. Now, as this story continues, as I took this sign down on January 1st, 2021, the very next day, Ann Maximowicz attacked me online. And I'll use their word, attack, right? They love that word, attack. Anytime you actually press back with words, it's attack. So I'm kind of tongue-in-cheeking that. But and so anyway, back up to getting close now to graduation. We're getting close to June and the election. I took that sign and I moved it across the street on the same piece of fence that had the honk if you support the school board banner on it, because the 14th Amendment says equal protection under the law.
Mm-hmm.
Within 30 minutes, they took the sign down. They then served me a prohibitive conduct warning, which basically meant the school board chair was not going to allow me to attend my senior daughter's my twins' senior graduation from high school. Now that became the big news. Now I hadn't planned it out that way. I basically just thought that I was going to be able to put this sign where this other sign was for at least 10 days like they did. And, the school board would continuously say, well, we never banned Mr. McBreairty from graduation. I have 5 different emails that say they did. And only until the 6th one did they allow me. And the only reason for that was Breitbart picked up the article on the Sunday, I think, before graduation. The Daily Wire picked it up on Monday. And then on, what day was it? On Thursday, I was on Tucker Carlson Tonight as the first in-studio guest. Tucker has a studio here in Maine at an undisclosed location that I can't give out. But I got to go on that and have that experience, which was amazing. I didn't know Tucker Carlson. I didn't even know he existed 1 year before I was on his show. I swear to God.
Isn't that funny?
Because, again,
I totally understand that experience. Yeah, I understand completely.
So after that, Patriots across the country emailed the lying narcissist, Jeff Porter, the superintendent of MS-80 51. He caved. He curled up in a fetal position and basically caved on everything. I went to graduation with no problem. And we were in the midst of moving, which then kind of takes me into my next story.